Now, what's interesting about all this, and we'll go ahead and wrap up on this, is that Roman Catholics, the honest historians who want to just do some fact checking on Pius IX, come to the conclusion that it's really not till the latter part of the fourth century that we actually get evidence that the church believed that Mary was sinless, and that's, instead of evidence of apostolicity, that's actually evidence of novelty. I want to introduce our listeners to the Evangelical Catholic Apologetics Association. I call them ECA for short. And they have a very helpful summary on the early church's position on Mary and her Immaculate Conception. And it's called The Immaculate Conception of the Mother of God, from Juniper Carroll's Mariology and Ulla Thorne's Immaculate Conception. And so before we get into some of their statements, I want to highlight their sources. Juniper Carroll lived from 1911 to 1990, and William Bernard Ullathorne lived from 1806 to 1889. Juniper Carroll was the founder of the Mariological Society of America, and for his exhaustive work in Mariology, he was awarded the Marian Library Medal in 1957. He also published a 3-volume set called Mariology from 1955 to 1961, which is the focus of the ECA Ministry's summary on the Immaculate Conception. Now, Ullathorne was a Roman Catholic archbishop, an English prelate who held high offices in the Roman Catholic Church during the 19th century, and was the first Roman Catholic bishop of the Diocese of Birmingham in England. Now, these are not illiterate, uneducated idiots. These men are well-studied, intelligent Roman Catholic men, priests, prelates, archbishops, that sort of thing. And this is what they had to say about the early church's belief about the sinlessness of Mary. We'll start with, so many people try to find some evidence of sinlessness in Mary by deferring to Hippolytus, who died in 235 AD. And they handle this in a very scholarly, objective fashion. They say, does Hippolytus' use of hagios as a rather vague laudatory epithet for Mary, is it used as a title of dignity, or does it imply moral excellence? In other words, they're asking the question, yes, Hippolytus used the word hagios in reference to Mary, but does that mean Hippolytus thought that she was sinless? And they say the answer must, in the state of the evidence, be a confession of ignorance. They can't say for sure that Hippolytus really was saying that Mary was sinless. So we go to Irenaeus, early 2nd century. He died in 202 AD. This is what they say about whether or not Irenaeus can be construed to say that Mary was sinless. They say, regrettably, Irenaeus' insight into the second or new Eve is not paralleled by any conclusion in the text with respect to the state of her soul prior to her fiat, that is, when she said, "Let it be done to me according to thy will." Did the Ante-Nicene Fathers glimpse a further consequence from the analogy and indication of Mary's sanctity? Say, who could possibly give a certain answer one way or the other? They just throw up their hands. When Roman Catholics try to prove Mary's sinlessness before Nicaea, wall of silence, where there just isn't anybody talking about Mary's sinlessness. And the fact is, Roman Catholicism, Steve Ray, Scott Hahn, and I'll say Carroll and Ullathorne, who we just cited from Evangelical Catholic Apologetics, they know very well that there just isn't any evidence in the early church for Mary's sinlessness, and what there is evidence for is Mary's sinfulness. And
right.
So I want our listeners to remember what Pius IX claimed in Ineffabilis Deus, the infallible proclamation that both the Eastern and Western Church forcibly testify to Mary's sinlessness. And the fact is, it's the exact opposite. They testified of her sinfulness and that she was an obstructionist. She intervened in Christ's ministry, sometimes to gain credit. She suffered from vainglory. She was a figure for the synagogue of the Jews. She had unbelief that had to be corrected, not through an Immaculate Conception, but at the cross. And it was not until after the cross that that swift healing came to Mary. It's not like he went backwards in time all the way to the moment of her conception. So in the West, this is from Juniper Carroll and Ola Thorne as being cited by ECA. This is what they have to say about the Western Church before Nicaea. One of the most perplexing problems in patristic Mariology revolves about Mary's holiness. The issue becomes complex in that it involves an aspect of Mary's sanctity acute for the contemporary Christian, the state of Mary's soul at the moment of her conception. From the close of the Apostolic Age to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the literary heritage of Western Christianity contains so remarkably little on the theme of Our Lady's holiness that a pointed question is inevitable. Was the pre-Nicene West even conscious of the problem?
Right.
And there's no problem except in the Roman Catholic doctrine. That's the problem. Right. The pre-Nicene West was fully aware of Mary's sinfulness. This is what they have to say about the Eastern Church. Between Nicaea and Ephesus, Marian theology makes scant progress in the East. Before the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, Eastern theology is apparently unaware of a problem in this regard. Where the literature touches on the sanctity of Mary, it does so for them obliquely, in passing, with a disinterest which is disconcerting and at times a familiarity which borders on discourtesy. Think about that. They're saying, we went looking for evidence that what Pius IX said was actually true, and we just couldn't find the data.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the church, up until the time when Roman Catholicism actually claimed that Mary was sinless, with the problem of Mary's holiness in a way that was altogether inconsistent with what Roman Catholicism would eventually claim. Roman Catholic Encyclopedia actually knows that there were people in the early church who thought Mary was sinful, and they just categorize it as stray private opinions. This is quoting from the Catholic Encyclopedia on the Immaculate Conception. Private opinions merely serve to show that theology is a progressive science. Well, I tell you what, that's the theological equivalent of the wizard telling Dorothy not to look at the man behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Don't look at the data. Don't look at the evidence. Just trust us on this. Mary was sinless. And all the things from John Chrysostom, Origen, Basil, Cyril, Tertullian, all stray private opinion, and that just shows that theology is a progressive science. And it didn't actually progress to the point of Mary being sinless until the latter part of the 4th century, and that's what the scholars say. And I'm quoting from Carroll. It says, a significant turning point in the Mariological consciousness of the West does not occur until 377 AD with the publication of St. Ambrose's 3 books on virginity. The attitude of Ambrose toward Mary is something novel in Latin literature. And then he says, with respect to Our Lady's holiness, the year 431 marks a turning point for the Eastern patristic thought. Now that's pretty interesting. It's quite a confession to say, you know what, we went looking for evidence, couldn't find it till the latter part of the 4th century. All those guys that did talk about Mary being sinful before the latter part of the 4th century, it's all stray private opinion. Pay no attention to it. Pius IX says that this is an apostolic doctrine, and you need to just accept that even though we haven't found the evidence on this, there's a 300-year gap, and you're just going to have to take our word for it, even though all the evidence is to the contrary. And this is the same position that Scott Hahn is in, the same position that Steve Ray is in. Any evidence he can provide prior to the latter part of the 4th century is questioned, dubious, forgery, heavily edited by Roman Catholics to make it say what they need it to say, and they can't find any evidence on the Ark, Mary as the Ark of the New Covenant, until you get to the end of the 4th century. And it turns out the same thing with the Immaculate Conception doctrine. And what this shows is the infallible proclamation from Pius IX not only is wrong, but it's an out-and-out lie. I mean, Pius IX knew very well that there was no evidence from the early church on Mary being sinless, And he left it to Carol and Olathorn to go back and clean up his mess and actually go look and say, well, the truth is, there's no real evidence in the West on Mary's immaculacy until 377, and in the East we don't even get that till 431. So we're talking about 4th and 5th century is when Roman Catholicism finally finds evidence for the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and that shows that it's not an apostolic teaching at all, and it's just a fraud that's been perpetrated on the world, and well, it's been perpetrated on Roman Catholics. Protestants don't have to take this lying down, though. Just point out the truth. It's a novelty from the late 4th century, and it's not an apostolic doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.